Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Corporate Services Committee for the 18th of March. Being that the chairperson is still in overseas, we will have to elect a chairperson. So I'll open the floor to nominations.
I nominate James Burns, Councillor James Burns.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott, and I accept. So apologies. Sorry, first thing we have to do is applications for attending meeting via video link.
Nil received.
Lovely. Apologies.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Councillor Williamson is an apology.
Councillor Williamson. I'll move that.
I'll second that.
The ayes have it. Disclosures of interest.
Nil received.
Public participation.
Again, nil.
Lovely. We'll move on to corporate services 03.1 property update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an ongoing report which really gives an overview of all matters happening across the property portfolio. So I'll kind of quickly move through the background section. So as we can see there, we currently have 28 properties under management, 19 of which are commercial shops, 10 reside within the Campbell's Corner complex in Scone, 3 residential, which comprises units and houses, and 6 vacant land parcels. So currently 25 of the 28 properties are tenanted. So if we then drill down, of the 26 leased properties, we have 11 under current leases, 12 have expired with 3 vacancies. So certainly during the period of February and March, draft leases have been prepared, reviewed by management and issued to those respective tenants. And our expectation is that we will have all leases in place by the end of April 2022. So this has been a major area of focus. Shops 2 and 4 in Campbell's Corner are currently vacant and available for lease. We have had a number of interested parties with no firm commitments at this stage. Clearly, we need to do a little bit of work in shop 4 in terms of the sanding of those, the flooring in there. So we've received quotes on that and we'll proceed with that work. And after we had a long-term tenant situated in shop 4 in the Civic Centre in Merriwar basically we saw the cessation of their lease effective from the 15th of February. So hence that's taken us up to 3 vacancies. The next bit of information is really a little bit of an overview and to give you an indication of the impacts of COVID. So there's still a sting in the tail. Certainly we saw the reintroduction by the New South Wales Government Small Business Commissioner in terms of the National Cabinet's commercial leasing code of conduct, which very much opened the door for tenants to negotiate with landlords. This effectively meant that if any commercial tenant saw 30% or more of decline in sales turnover, then they could definitely have the conversation with their landlord and seek some sort of compensation or allowance. So the impact of that is that we had 4 tenants who wrote to council. The amount that was effectively approved was $18,670.28 of rental relief. Now, I guess the guidelines around this was at least 50% could be rent that was essentially written off, and the other 50% could be deferred. So essentially what that has meant, and that deferral was over a 3-month period. So since those lockdowns, which were reintroduced back in July of 2021, what we've got at the moment is of those 4 tenants, specifically there is an amount of over $36,000, which includes those deferred amounts, which are still outstanding. The total outstanding rent is $45,540. And certainly we're working very closely with all of those tenants, both the impacted and directly impacted and those that are a little bit behind the where they should be, to have these payments cleared, certainly before the end of the current financial year. All right, just turning over the page. So we are on page 2. So land development, I guess we're all very well aware that the property market has seen significant improvements over the last 6 months, with house and land sales certainly seeing a significant shift in terms of movement after being listed. That's very much right across the Shire. It has also meant that there's been a shortage, if you like, of available both land and house and land packages. So council has engaged a valuer to assess council-owned land to determine the most viable options for developing the land. And it's certainly recommended that we look to opening new development opportunities in the 4 major townships in the near future. So I can tell you that I've personally received a number of inquiries, probably the most of which has been Aberdeen, principally because that's been the most recent subdivision that has just, we've closed off the last of the land sales there, but notwithstanding, certainly in Merriwa and Murrurundi as well. Aberdeen Heights, as I alluded to, so we had stages 5 and 6, which were developed back in 2013. So there were 32 lots made available, and essentially the last of those was closed out towards the latter part of 2021. So it took quite some time to get there. And I will tell you that the initial sale price that was put on those lots was reduced in order to obviously meet the market demands. So I would essentially say to you now that you know, it is market driven, and there is a great appetite for land availability. So we're probably more in the driver's seat in terms of ensuring that we're getting a better return on the cost of those subdivisions. So if we move through that, obviously we have a master plan which was developed back in 2011, and then there is a further 110 lots potentially that we could make available. So there are certainly a number of options that we could have a look at, entering into joint ventures and arrangements with developers, selling the parcels of land to a third-party developer on an in globo basis. So that's really any undeveloped lot, group of lots or parcels of land that is zoned for and is capable of subdivision into smaller parcels. So certainly the recommendation is around conducting a feasibility study to be done over the next coming months to really ascertain what is the most applicable way forward. So in terms of the options, those are to either note the report and progress with investigations into the development of available land at Aberdeen Heights, or to note the report only and not proceed with the above. So I'll open it up for questions.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair. With the land in Aberdeen that council owns, would we be looking at potentially social housing, developing it into social housing, given that that is clearly a need, and given that there is a dearth of social housing in New South Wales and across Australia broadly?
So thank you for the question, Councillor Abbott. So I'll take that, and then I'll obviously ask either the Director or General Manager to add to it. Yes, I think we have a social responsibility to take that into consideration as well. So it's not just the commercial viability, but ensuring that whatever we do, that we are, to the best of our ability, addressing, you know, those gaps. So be it, you know, purely from a first homeowners opportunity and also from a social housing perspective.
Yeah, there is certainly potential to, within that plan that you can see on page 6, there's opportunity for smaller lots. So that could be the affordable housing box with smaller allotments and more dense development, rather than your traditional 600 to 800 square metre box. So there is opportunity for affordable housing within the mix of the development.
So through you, Mr. Chair, so we will be looking at that then. It will be a consideration, as Mr. Gatwood was saying.
We can certainly look at it. There's everything's on the table at the moment. Yeah.
We'll include it in our deliberations. It'll be council's decision at the end of the day as to what they choose. But as the directors and the managers said, there's scope, and we've already talked to some property developers around this, for a mix of lot sizes and lot uses, and they said some properties could be more suitable to affordable housing, whilst other properties are more suitable to normal residential and the like. So we will keep all the mix in in the options.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, when will that report come back? When can we expect that?
Oh, there's probably a fair bit of work involved here because we're just essentially starting, apart from the plan, we're starting from scratch. So we'll look for, we don't have the skills in-house to do that. So we'll be looking for a consultant to do that for us. And the brief will be to come up with a range of options that for council to consider. How long that will take, I'm not sure, maybe 3-4 months, but I can't give a date until we engage a particular consultant.
Through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of social housing, you've talked about more affordable blocks, but I think social housing, you know, there's levels of that. And there is an absolute crisis in terms of housing throughout all of our towns for affordable housing and people in domestic violence situations, homelessness, a range of things. So I don't think a lot of those people are in a position to buy a new block, no matter how big or small. So what can we do as a council in terms of a lot of the state grant opportunities and things for social housing? Are there some houses that we could invest in to have for social housing to secure in our own communities?
So you're right. We need to differentiate between the social housing and affordable housing because they are two different things. So affordable housing is typically smaller blocks, denser development to allow people to get into the property market. Social housing that you're talking about is not something that most councils got a lot of experience in. They typically rely upon either the state government to assist them, providing grants, or even third parties who are specialised in this. We would need to partner with someone because we don't have the in-house skills. We will look at both options. More likely is a social housing option would be 1 or 2 properties out of the entire mix being dedicated to a social housing provider that they would then operate and manage. So that's how we'd probably manage that. And we'd have to partner with someone because we don't have the skills.
And would we be able to look at that in all of the towns as well? I think that's really important.
It's something that this council's only really touched on in the last 12 months, first of all, here in Scone. It hasn't been part of our budget allocation because it does come with a cost. So if that was something that council wanted to consider in the upcoming budget, we would need to allocate funds because in effect we are providing subsidy to the provider to allow that service to be run from a property that we own.
Could I just clarify through you, Mr. Chair, that I was talking about social housing, and also we have a responsibility to undertake to have a parcel or a large portfolio, I think, of social housing. And there were housing commission houses once. Did that come under council? I know in England, council houses come under council. Has it never been
Housing
under local
commission's
government?
always been a state government controlled operations. It's never been a council issue. No.
So, but we know, and we're hearing about it in the media and the state government's talking about it, that we really need to do something about social housing. And as you, Mr. Gatwood has reported, that land prices are going very well here. So a lot of people have been priced out of the market. And I really believe that council should have a portfolio of social housing, and it's not free. I mean, people still pay rent, so it's not a drain, but it's a responsibility. And it's something that we can do for the community and for the particularly the people in the community who won't be able to buy a house and need a home. We know that it addresses mental health issues, because if you know that you have a home for decades, and not worrying that you have to get out next year or the following year, that certainly makes your life a lot more livable and you can get on with living your life. So I think as a council, we really need to be addressing social housing, however we end up doing that, but it ought to be a priority, just like roads. It's really, really important.
And as I say, that'll be part of the budget deliberation that council will consider in conjunction with the options report that comes back on this.
So through you, Mr. Chair, could we have a report on how social housing with council could be structured? Because yes, while there are private operators who have housing, a lot of people who need to access that either need to move to Muswellbrook or go to Singleton. So particularly with DV situations, they've got to go to Singleton or Newcastle, which is untenable if you've got your kids in school here. So I really think that if the private market has dropped the ball on that for our community and we're not getting those services, well, then that's perhaps something that council needs to start looking at so that people in Murrundi, Merriwa, etc. aren't isolated or have to leave town. But I'd like to see some kind of proposal on how that may work.
We can have a look at it. As I said, we haven't typically been in this space, so we don't have the in-house skill set to probably do this on our own. We'd need to get some assistance. We haven't got any budget allocated for that. So can we come back to you with, we'll give some consideration to what resources we need to be able to develop that report and how long that might take, and we'll provide a response back to this committee.
I mean, we've also got real estate agents. I mean, it's just managing a property. We manage a lot of commercial stuff now. So I think, it's a fairly basic skill set.
Yeah, no, we'll just need to reach out outside of this organisation to get some guidance.
Yeah, in terms of social housing, it certainly we would have to partner with state government. It's not typically something council does, but we can partner with other agencies too.
Yeah, and I think we'd have to in terms of getting grant funding and support, but if that was something we could partner with them to make sure that we've got that in our community, I think that's really important.
I've a few questions. The first one is the rental relief that we've provided. The 45,000, is that, are we insured for that?
So no, the 45,000 is not. That is the total amount that's currently outstanding. So the 18,000. Sorry, I'm just trying to reflect back on the exact figure on page 1. So the 18,670 is potentially the amount of money that we can apply for assistance with, because the secondary part of the reinstallation of the commercial leasing code is that obviously landlords, including councils, can apply for relief to have that money recovered. So we need to go through a process to then hopefully recover that amount.
Yeah.
The rest is essentially monies that we will receive in time, either through deferral, and then there is obviously those tenants who haven't applied for rental relief, but are obviously there are monies outstanding in terms of their monthly rental that they need to pay.
So what's the arrears policy, and are we still able to conduct ourselves in a manner where it's commercially viable? Are we allowed to evict after a certain amount of months?
So what is unclear at the moment is whether there is a distinct timeline, because one of the hard and fast rules in terms of the reintroduction of this code of conduct is that landlords were not in a position to evict a tenant because of under COVID-19. So here we are now where the bulk of restrictions have been lifted. That's a little bit of a grey area. So certainly, what we've endeavoured to do is to work with these tenants, provide relief where appropriate, and there was obviously evidence that needed to be provided. So these were bank statements or showing the decline in turnover on a year-on-year basis. So all of those 4 tenants were able to do that. But essentially, we've also got tenants that were definitely impacted by COVID, but did not apply to council for relief.
Okay, no worries. I'll direct the next question to Mr. Phelps. Is that something we can write off within one of our taxables? Or
through the chair, we actually aren't in a tax situation, so we don't have any tax implications at all. So effectively, it's a straight write-off of cash if you're doing it like that. So, but under the policies within the debt recovery side of things, you're more or less looking at, if it gets to 90 days, we'll send it off to a debt collector. If we've had no success in obtaining any suitable recompense from the actual tenant or provider of any service that we provide.
Okay, thank you.
Just following on that, our year-to-date actual versus budget on rental income is around the high 80s, nearly 90%. So we're actually doing a lot better than a lot of other councils in that regard.
That's
So,
fine. Yeah, no, I understand that we're working with people, but I just like to understand how we're going to, you know, the 14,500 landlords that we've got here in town in the Shire have to know that their money's actually coming back to them. But the second line of questioning, if we go back down to Aberdeen, and I'm looking at this plan here, and I realise it is just a concept plan, but how much is it going to, because that's obviously been through a DA process at some point, which the DA would still be extant because we've started down there. How much of an issue is that going to be if we do change block sizes, you know, changing, we would have to sell the DA, I'd imagine, to get someone else on board.
So there's a couple of ways we can take this, Mr. Chair. One is to do a conventional development, which is we take the risk, we wear all the expenditure of doing the development ourselves through using contractors, of course, and then we take the profit from the sale of the land. If we stuck to the current DA allotment that's already been approved, we could proceed along those lines. There's already a construction certificate in place for the first probably 20 or 30 lots immediately adjacent to those that have already been developed. So we could continue on using that construction certificate that's been approved. If there was a variation to that in accordance with council's direction around either affordable social housing and lot sizes, that would require an amendment to the DA, but it could still be done through the normal planning instruments. The second alternative is that council sells the entire parcel or a portion of the parcel, say an equivalent to about 20 lots of development size, to a developer. It's less risk to us. We get the income immediately and the developer takes the risk of doing the development. We would have no control over the lot size in that instance, or social housing or affordable housing. The developer would do what is commercially, I guess, drives him, which would probably be maximise the lot yield.
Could we, sorry, just on that, and it might be something you have to take on notice, and that's fine, but could we put in the sale, in the deed of sale, you have to provide X?
I believe anything could probably put in a contract. Enforcing the contract down the track would be our responsibility. So there'd be some onus on council to ensure that, and it would reflect presumably in the sale price. So yep, as long as we went into it with our eyes open and understood those issues.
No, that's fine. I just make sure you can do it.
The third option, which has been alluded to by the manager, is that there's maybe a joint venture option where we continue to develop the lots, but rather than having to expend the cost of development up front, we partner with someone who wears the cost of the development to make it easier from a cash flow point of view for us, but then we share in the profit. So maybe the return is less, but the outlay is presumably less, and we still have some control. Now, I don't have a preference, and none of the staff have a preference over any of those options at the moment. That's what we're alluding to, that we will do a little bit more research. If we've got general, in principle, support from this committee and the council, when it goes up to council to proceed, we'll look at all those options.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to, because there's quite a bit of land here, one of the options might be to do it in stages rather than to dump it all on the market at one time. So we'd have to do a feasibility in terms of market demand. And obviously, you know, there is the option of doing it in stages, 3 or 4 different stages.
Yep. Okay. No worries. No further questions?
Just asking you, Mr. Chair. So the recommendation just says note the report, but on page 2 we have options. So what are we going to do now?
I'm happy to go whichever way you would like, Councillor, if you want to.
Well, I would like to note the report and progress with investigations into the development of available land at Aberdeen Heights, and with a focus on social housing. along with everything? How
Yeah.
would you like?
So you would just move that exactly as you just
Okay,
said.
so I move that.
I second that.
Have you got that, Karen? Thank you. Have a mover and a seconder.
Yes, me.
All those in
second.
favour?
Aye.
The ayes have it. Okay. So we'll just let Karen catch up. Slowing it down. It's Friday morning. No one needs to go breakneck speed today. Okay, corporate services 03.2, financial summary and investment report. Mr. Phelps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we'll just take you through, this meeting is more or less just the high level view of where the finances are. We don't have the big book of everything this time around, which is always a bonus. Overall, to the end of February, we've got a positive variance to actuals of 154K, which is in comparison to about nearly $2 million from the December period, so which was the last time then we reported on. So included in that 154, it's pretty close to budget, but there's a lot of movers ups and downs actually throughout the actual areas of the budget. At the moment, as you can see by the second one there, we've got a number of council businesses and service entities that are challenged at the moment with operational and the external factors being the floods and so forth, and resulted in the actual budget expectations being pretty well under pressure. So just highlighting that as we're coming through. At the moment, we're going through and doing a full review of where we think we're going to finish up at the end of June. So, and we'll be bringing that back towards in the next corporate services meeting. So just to give the committee an idea of where we're actually going to fall by 30 June. Just looking at the main variations coming through for the period ended 28th of February. Revenue is down by about $2.1 million, which is about 4%. Main movers in this has been the children's services areas, which have been really affected by the COVID impacts, as well as staff vacancies, with children numbers being lower because we haven't had an early childhood teacher in the facility. We're trying to get that vacancy filled so that we can increase our numbers again. Obviously, demand is out there, but based on the licensing requirements, we're not allowed to go above a certain level, which is about only 38 to 40 children. So it's also offset a little bit by lower expenditure, but it's a little bit under pressure from a revenue stream. Government Place, as highlighted in a number of other meetings that council has had, its revenue is down by about 70K. We've had 2 vacancies there for nearly 4 months, so we've had trouble filling those positions over there in the facility. Sale yards revenue is down by about 111K. Cattle numbers remain a bit lower than anticipated. However, the numbers have been relatively stable. We had a bit of a dip with the flooding, obviously, with farmers bringing the cattle into the last lot of sales. So we'll be going back to a stability over the course of the next couple of weeks, I would assume. Airport revenue is down by about 92K, just a bit lower in landing fees, bit in regards to invoicing. We're always a bit of a lag with our invoicing side of things with airport. So hopefully that will improve slightly. Waste management is down by about 85K, just reduced landfill revenue coming through and scrap metal sales to this state. It generally goes up and down though, coming through.
So could I just ask a question through you, Mr. Chair? Just with the landfill, reduced landfill revenue and scrap metal. So how do we normally make the money there? Is that from people going to the tip or whatever it is?
Yes, through the chair. That's more or less the people coming into the landfill and paying the fee to actually drop off landfill.
So less people, is that a COVID reason, or is that less people going to the tip, the waste transfer, whatever
So overall, it could be a number of factors. It could have been due to the floods coming through. So, and people just haven't got to the tip for the landfill disposals. Scrap metal is another issue. We've probably got a stockpile of scrap metal up there that will be sold in one big bunch. Right. So it could catch up that revenue streams very quick coming through.
Thank you. And just through you, Mr. Chair, with the childcare worker or teacher, so we're looking for somebody at the moment, and that's been difficult?
Yeah, constantly. It's a very much a shortage within the industry of getting an early childhood teacher on board. So we've it's very challenging at the moment within that sector.
Yeah, we did interviews yesterday.
We've actually sought permission to use people who aren't fully qualified, but working towards their qualification too, to try and get some sort of a wider field of applicants. And we've been given permission for that. And we actually had somebody start and do a couple of days or a week, I think it might have been, and then was given another offer and moved on. So we have this constant challenge of interviewing, appointing and losing staff. So as Mr. Phelps said, we can actually turn some of this financial loss around if we get somebody in there permanently, but even with the changes we've made, we've been unsuccessful.
Through you, Mr. Chair, why are we having trouble with retention? Is it the amount of remuneration offered? What's the issue, do you think?
Oh, I think it's just the sector itself. There's a shortage throughout the industry in regards to early childhood teachers.
But when we do get one, why are they leaving? How can we retain them?
Well, I suppose it depends on what age group they're in and what part of their life are actually at. If you get somebody that turns up and they bring the family here, then obviously they'll stay for a lot longer. But we couldn't. The best way with any industry like that is you try and grow the staff up within it, and then get them to that level. And as the general manager alluded to, we tried that method as well. We've got a number of young girls over there and males going through the process of actually doing training and doing studies to try and bring themselves up to that level.
Through the chair, if I may, I can give you a very personal account of why this is a challenge. I have a wife who's been involved in the childcare industry for a number of years. I also have an 18-year-old daughter who's just started a position within hospitality. She's currently making $12 an hour more than what her mother is. So it's an incredibly, underpaid sector and underrepresented sector from that perspective. So that will continue to be a challenge until award rates move to where they should be.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can we not just pay more? Do we have to stick within the award rates? I mean, obviously that is an issue, and childcare or teachers in general and all care workers seem to be underpaid. And that's probably, if we paid more money, we might be able to hang on to somebody.
Absolutely, we can pay more, but the ramifications are that we either have to subsidise that through council other services by, as you can see, there's already a loss here now, or put the fees up. So there's a cost to doing that, obviously.
Through you, Mr. Chair, though, I'm looking at, lower than budget by 262K. So in terms of looking at how that could be offset, if we paid someone more money and we weren't losing as much money, wouldn't that just be a net benefit to pay them more?
You'd have to do a lot of modelling around that coming through. And obviously it's a factor that with the costs, they're also down by 167,000. So you've only got, it's only a differential there of about the...
And it's also only one quarter.
100.
Because it hasn't always been that.
And COVID has had an effect because the children numbers have been down based on a number of shutdowns that we've had to actually have in the facility. So there's been other mitigating factors around that. So we're sort of like a sitting on a line ball situation, but it'd be better if we had an extra early learning teacher there.
I'd just point out too, it's not just paying one staff member, it would be paying all staff members a higher rate in order to match that. So for equity and just to ensure that we didn't have an industrial issue in that centre. So there would be a cost associated.
I also think we have to take into account that we have the lowest unemployment in the valley. So headhunting is a very difficult thing. We cannot find staff. That's not just Shire, that's business, that's the hospital, that's everyone. So it's a difficult thing, and people can be more choosy.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just a question back on Gumman Place. When you say there's 2 vacancies, are we talking residents or staff? I assume residents.
Residents, yeah, okay. Yes, correct. Yeah. Moving down further now into To the chair again, the RMS state roads revenue is lower by about $200,000, been a bit limited in works coming from Transport New South Wales. However, there's been an increase in activity over in that space in the coming up to the end of June. So obviously they have money in their budget and they want to spend it now. So we feel like being pushed along with that. Water supply and sewerage revenue, it's down by about $1 million. And the main factor of that is just the timing of when the last billing went out. We had a few delays in regards to water meter readings and so forth. And the bills went out to like the first week in March. So about $1 million, as you can see there, 982 of the 1.07 million is coming in the beginning of March. So it's pretty well in line.
Through you, Mr. Chair, sorry, just on water, while I remember it, at some stage we were actually looking at doing fluoride treatment in the water. This has been going on for about 2 terms of council, I think. And I'm just wondering where that's up to, just on the waterfront.
Yep. We have costs for some of that. It's exceed the pre-tender estimates have been basically blown out of the water. Excuse the pun. The Department of Health, who administer that program and funding, were actually up here this week. They spent effectively the whole day with the water staff. I spent maybe 40 minutes with them in the afternoon, just to get a quick catch up on the summary on where they're at. They're going to go back and look at other grant funding or revenue sources so that we can administer that program and put it into place. But at this stage, the cost to administer and the actual estimates to put it into place exceed the grant funding that they've allocated. So we need to revisit that.
Thank you, Mr. GM. Moving into non-operating revenue and expenditure. As you can see there, we're down by about 400,000 at this point in time. Internal fleet hire charge has been a little bit lower than we anticipated. Just had a bit of a drop over the last couple of months due to the wet weather and also the leave around the Christmas period, and the school holiday period. But overall, it's relatively consistent, and obviously with a lot of focus in regards to the flood damage work that we're doing at the moment, as well as the capital works program, that should improve markedly by the end of June. Operating expenditure is only up by about 370,000 today, which is about 1%. It's a little bit underspent at the moment. There's movers up and down within this part of the operations itself. Government place costs are quite large. It's 285,000 higher than budget at the moment, and more or less those higher costs are around the costs associated with the staff employment, with difficulties encountered with vacancies and rostering issues. And also we engaged provider assist to review our ACFI, which is more or less to look at the residents' needs and what we can actually get back from the government. So what those two reviews have done meant that we can increase our revenue streams over the course from when they finish that actual review. And they were looking at a 12-month period of being $160,000 for each 5 residents. So it's about 320,000 increase over a 12-month period. Obviously, we need to keep up the services which make up that modelling, but it's one of those things that we just need to continually put the money into doing those reviews, because it actually they're professionals in regards to the dependency of old age care facilities. Moving into children's services, as I mentioned earlier, the cost of that is down by about $180,000. So that's a bit of the offsetter coming back to the revenue streams. Waste management costs are lower by 170 as well, just a bit lower in the curbside and bulky waste collection. Plus, we've had a few staff vacancies in that area, which is now being filled. So, we've got a little bit of a cost saving there. Bridge maintenance costs are down by about 100,000. With regards to a lot of our bridges, we're going through that timber replacement program at the moment, timber bridge replacement program. So obviously our cost for those will be down. So a lot of these savings will go back into those actual infrastructure needs coming forward.
Just a question on that. Is Allendale Bridge, Allendale Bridge,
yep.
Where's that one up to financially?
Yeah, so we've got notification back from the driver's insurance company who damaged the bridge. that they will cover the cost for the repairs of that bridge. So that is now being hastily acted upon. So over the course of the next couple of months, that should be fully repaired.
Lovely. Thank you.
Moving into the next one, the RMS state roads, obviously with lower revenue streams coming through from the limited request, our costs are also down. So it's just an offsetter coming through from that angle. Moving on to the regional and local roads maintenance, it's higher than budget at the moment by 500K. Main reason for that is coming in regards to the flood damage. So at the end of February, there was about $730,000 worth of flood damage works that council had undertaken since November period coming through. And that's continued to grow, obviously, with the end of February floods as well. So that'll be backed out, obviously, or that'll remain in there, I beg your pardon, but we will receive a revenue stream attached to the flood.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So we have received grant funding or assistance, have we, for the flood? Is that right? Is that you sent something through you, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, so we don't have the funding yet. So what happens is you need to get the declaration first, which is what we've got. So we've got the declaration. What that does is it now opens the floodgates for the money to flow.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you are just doing too many puns tonight.
No, sorry, that was unintentional, that one. So now the money is available. What we need to do is we actually need to still, even though we've had two events, so the November event and the February event, we still haven't finished the tidy up from the November event when the February event hit us. We account for all that. We set up a special account that actually tracks our costs. They all get bundled up when we've done all the work. That gets sent off and then we get reimbursed. So there's a formula that goes with that. They do their checks and balances and we get paid back. So the have you got an estimate?
Yeah,
sorry,
so
Wayne,
as I mentioned earlier, you're just coming back into the room.
Sorry,
I
just had a call from Dave Lozelle.
No,
he's generally giving money out when I ring. So.
That's fine. So effectively, we've had 736,000 spent in regards to flood damage coming through to the end of February.
Yeah, thanks.
So is that a dollar for dollar traditionally?
We have to wear the first $250,000 of the cleanup cost, and then after that, the costs are then met by the government.
So I would assume that at about $250,000, that would be for this cleanup. It'd probably just be staff costing at the time.
A lot of staff costing, but also contractors.
Yeah,
so we've used a lot of contractors.
So the
to go and do the
250,000 we were going to spend anyway.
Yes, so some of those costs were probably costs that we would have allocated, but as Wayne said, there's still a lot of material costs.
Yeah.
So replacing the gravel, washed out pipes and the like. So there is over and above the normal costings.
Lovely.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I've heard that the funding can be quite difficult and that it's not as easy as saying there's been damage and you've got to assess what kind of damage and if it's being caused by flood or just rain or they blame our drainage and a range of complex issues. Would I be able to get a report on actually, what we can get out of that funds? Because I've been led to believe that, there is usually quite a significant shortfall from what the government gives us to the repairs that we generally need to do post an event like this.
Yeah. So under the repair program, you can only replace like with like. So you can't upgrade. They're very particular about councils trying to take the opportunity to upgrade an asset. So if we had a gravel causeway that got washed out, we can't go back and put it in concrete. In some instances, we have said to them, will you meet the cost of the gravel causeway if we then meet the cost over and above, because we can see economic benefit to do the work at this stage rather than coming back and doing it at a later stage. They're a little bit hesitant about that in some instances, but with negotiation, you can do it. Similar with bridges, sometimes a bridge might get washed out. You might want to replace it with a set of pipe culverts or something to that effect. So they don't generally like that, but with negotiation, it can be done. But you've got to remember too that they're dealing with probably 30 or 40 councils at the moment. If they get too many variances, they don't have the staffing then to manage it either. So if they get too much pushback, they just fall back to their like for like. We don't want to hear anything else, and they just want to administer the projects from that perspective. Having said that, there's a few that we'd probably be talking to them about upgrading, but not too many. Most of them will be like for like in this instance.
Okay, right, yeah. No, you're right, that's fine. So moving into the next area there, our sewer operational maintenance and costs have been lower by about 120,000. So that's the main movers within that expenditure category coming through in our P&L. As you can see, there is ups and downs within that area. The major offsetter against the revenue streams is the capital works. So we're underspending our capital works by about 2.3 million at the moment. The main variations there has been around the Merriwell Showground shed and campcraft. It's continually in play at the moment. Due to wet weather, it's been pushed back slightly in its actual delivery, but however, it'll be delivered by the end of June 2022. The airport development is lower by about 100,000, so it's very much on target at this point in time, and it's progressing on the revised schedule. Cameron's Bridge has been a little bit lower than anticipated. Obviously, with the wet weather, it's slowed us down a little bit there. Expectation is that that'll be completed by May, June this year anyway. So it'll catch up coming through. Ringwood Road, again, is progressing to a revised schedule due to the weather. Heavy patching programs down by about 200,000. Review of those costs we're actually looking at the moment because some of those costs have been gone to maintenance. So we'll be moving those into the capital area of the actual of the P&L. Sewer renewals and replacements is lower by about nearly 500,000. So we've had lower requirements with renewals to date, but we're going through finishing our relining programs in our sewer network. And obviously from that, there comes out a lot of renewals coming into the play. So we may get to spend that by the end of the year. So we've got a bucket of money there if we need to use it. So a lot of that is reactive though. A lot of our sewer money that we put into the budget is a reactive process. So as soon as we find that there's something that we're having multiple sewer chokes, we'll go out and actually replace it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, do we have a work schedule for our sewage, like rather than being reactive? That always worries me in terms of budget and planning.
Yeah.
Do we have a process where we're routinely inspecting different areas of sewage?
We actually have a CCTV, which we contract out. So we're going through that process as well. So it's sticking the camera up, and obviously underground, you don't know what's below the ground.
And now I want to make a pun, but
yes. Okay, so when you add up all those different categories within the P&L, there's a variance of 150,000. Budget position has stayed the same coming through, but as I said earlier, we're going through doing this full review at this minute, and at the next meeting we'll bring that to the committee. Bank funds and investment report, as you can see at the end of February, we had just 30,500,000, of which 29.2 of it is sitting in the investments at the moment. And as you'll see coming through in the schedules, there's a schedule there for January and February. Capital expenditure report. So at the end of February, we've got a revised capital works program of 40,500,000. Our original adopted budget obviously was 64.8 million. To date, to the end of February, we spent 17.2, which only represents 42%. So coming through the mix to February, that's 2/3 of the way through the year. So based on the spend of February, it's unrealistic that the remaining portion of the revised budget, which is 23 million over the next four-month period, will be fully spent by the end of June. Now, those factors, obviously, we've had issues with regards to the flooding events and sourcing contractors. So obviously the contractors are under the pump as well, doing works. So we're continually reviewing that infrastructure works program on a monthly basis. So we're very, very mindful of that. So at our next review, we'll be going through and doing a hard revision of that and critically assessing whether or not those projects will be delivered by the end of June. And if not, we'll be coming back to the April meeting with some revised forecasts coming into the mix. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's on 100.
Page 11.
11. Yep. So after that, we've pretty well got our schedules coming through, which is on page 14. So they're more or less the schedules, just to give you a high-level view of where our service entities are sitting from a revenue and expenditure basis. And as you can see, the bottom line on 17 there is the 154 variance to budget. For the month of February, on page 18, we've got very minimal votes coming through. So obviously, as I've alluded to, we'll probably have a lot more votes coming through the mix in our next meeting as we work through. So I'll give you time just to have a quick look at those. They're very more or less movements within budget areas themselves.
So through you, Mr. Chair, what with the impediment of the floods and not getting on with some of the projects that we want to do, what will happen with all that money that we haven't? What will happen with the projects and the money?
A lot of those projects are grant funded projects and councils allocated funds from reserves. So what happens with those projects is they just get deferred until next year. So as we're going through the budget process at the moment, they just cascade down into next year. And then obviously we have to look at our program next year and pick out a realistic delivery of what we can do next year. And some of those projects might be pushed back another 12 months. So it has a little bit of a cascade effect.
And in relation, through you, Mr. Chair, to the Depop, is that going to come before councillors to have an input on allocating the budget, rather than as has happened in my term of council, where it comes already allocated? Will councillors have a say?
What we'll have is we'll have a couple of workshops in regards to the Depop. We'll provide a Depop that will be more or less what staff have recommended, but councillors have that opportunity at those workshops to actually go through and make suggestions and so forth. But obviously,
sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I found that it's really impossible to shift anything once it's already been recommended by staff. And I know in terms of the library and sustainability, there's been very little money ever allocated. And I'm not talking about the purchase of Campbell's Corner, I'm just talking about everything to do with running a library, because you could do that in a tent. But also sustainability and climate change, we just haven't been putting enough money towards it. So I am disappointed if we come to, it's sort of a bit like Groundhog Day, where we come back to looking at the Depop with the money already allocated and us just to approve it.
No, it's not like that, Councillor Abbott. You have the say at those meetings to actually voice your opinion on what you want to do with those funds. But obviously we want to deliver a budget what we think council will be able to achieve. What councillors' views and what their priorities are is what that can be voiced at those workshops, because it's not set in stone until it goes to the council meeting in April.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand what you're saying, Councillor and you, but I'm wondering, would it be worthwhile to have a workshop before the draft Depop is done, that we can discuss what are the higher level strategic things that we want to achieve? So setting that strategic framework a little bit, that may influence what that draft Depop is, and then go to the other workshops to keep workshopping it. I hear what Councillor Abbott is saying in terms of, the strategic direction that councillors may want to take, and that may colour how you allocate.
That is happening at the moment with the strategic plan being developed at the moment. That's happening there.
Mr. Chair, can I just add, we actually did the process last year. We had a number of workshops, and in fact, council changed the budget, if you recall, to put more money into the roads program. And it was a significant amount of money that they changed. So it doesn't come pre-prepared. We will provide you an estimate with a balanced budget as best we can. Councillors can adjust that. We would always lean towards a balanced budget. So if you want to add things in, that's your prerogative, but it needs to come from another area. So you'll need to make those decisions as to what services or facilities won't you provide if you want to put more money into another area. So that's council's prerogative, and that's how we ran it last year, and we'll presumably do the same thing again. That's what the staff have got prepared.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. It's not set in stone until it's adopted in June. So anytime up to that point, and even at the June meeting, counts, that's when we consider feedback from the community, but also from councils. Even during that period, we can still consider that in terms of the final budget.
To the chair, the strategic development that we're doing at the moment, what is then the mechanism between the strategy that we're doing and the Depop? Is there a section there as a midpoint where we can then be looking at that broader strategy and allocation that will then shape the Depop?
So everything that comes to us as councillors is tied back to the strategic plan. Everything has a goal and it's informed by the strategic plan. So whilst people don't always see the benefit in some of the things that we do, it is tied back to what they told us in the beginning. And we have to adhere to that through our audit schedule. So you can see it in your report here. I'm not sure where it'll be, but on every, there you go. If you go back to page 3, so
that could really be tightened up, by the way. I don't think we need the logos and stuff. Less paper would be great.
That's just how they do it. But the fact is, every decision we make has to be tied back to that. So the staff give us those. If we make a change, that's completely up to us.
Yeah, so in practicality, is there a mechanism as we're going through that strategic plan before the Depop starts where we can look at what those priorities are within that strategic plan?
When are we adopting the strategic plan?
The CSP will proceed to Depop.
Yeah.
So that's the first body of work that we're doing now. I think we've received around 150 submissions. So we're putting that into the new document for council's consideration. So that'll come. That'll be a precursor to the Depop. So as the chair said, everything in the Depop links back up to the strategy in the CSP, because the CSP is that's the overarching document.
Through you, Mr.
So
Chair.
everything we do in the Depop needs to somehow link to the strategies and objectives in the CSP.
So through you, Mr. Chair, with the CSP, when is that due? And I'd be interested to see when we've got the town-based committees too, just to bounce that off before we finalise the CSP.
We're probably in a position to have the CSP ready within the next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
2 to 3 weeks as a draft.
So, but not coming to the March meeting through you, Mr. Chair? April.
Oh, it won't be ready for the March meeting. Yeah.
So will the town-based committees be done by then? Because it might be a nice mechanism to be able to have the town-based committees then look at that.
Yeah, I will bring us back to this. We're actually talking about the finances. I know what you're saying, but I think we talk about that offline. So if we can talk about that outside, Mr. Phelps.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back through the final lot of the schedules that are attached to the actual report. Obviously, we've got the bank rec there, and you can see with the little curve of money going up and down, depending on when we get grant funding and when we spend away. The investment schedules on page 20 and 21 there, we have to provide each month coming through. So obviously, when we done the December month end in the last meeting, so we've got January and February to catch that up there. And then moving into just those last lot of schedules there, which is more or less just a summary of all our capital works expenditure, just to give you an idea of where all the individual projects are actually at this point in time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Is there any questions? No questions. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder to, what are we doing? That the committee note, one, note the fund and function summary report. 2, note the cash and investment report. 3, note the responsible accounting officer's statement on investments. 4, note the capital works expenditure report. And 5, adopt the proposed budget variations.
I'll move it.
Moved, Councillor Flaherty.
Seconded.
Seconded, Councillor Abbott. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Lovely. Okay. Corporate Services, point 03.3, Scone Airport Project Update. Mr. Agosto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Current status of the airport and Hunter Warbirds project is that it's actually very near completion. In fact, by the end of today, we should have completed all of the works on the Warbirds, apart from some defect rectification and some paint touch-ups and things like that that we'll be doing over the next week. So during going back to the report, during the month of January, we completed the drainage works at the southern end of the airport. The landowner was very happy with that and handled the rain event in February reasonably well. We're having to go back just to do a little tweak. We've discussed that with the landowner and he's happy for us to tweak it a bit, which will control the water even more. So that's a good result there. The engine rev-up bay was completed in February and that's been very well accepted by the users and being used a lot. We had on the surfaces of the runway, taxiways and apron, we had an independent expert visit on Wednesday, just gone, the 16th of March. And he reviewed what he saw there and he's going to follow up with a report on that, with some recommendations. He's very highly experienced and he's worked in airports, including Brisbane and Sydney, as well as regional airports, new as well as refurbishment and repairs. So his CV reads very, very well.
So if you do, through you, Mr. Chair, who is this we're discussing? This is an investigator.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair, who?
Oh, investigating an expert on looking at the surfaces to determine the rectification works. Yes.
We've sung really high praises. Who is it?
It's a man called Jacko. He's from GHD. He's got a long second name.
No worries.
And yes, he's GHD's nationwide expert on airport surfaces.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just if you could clarify me, it said note that all remediation measures require hot weather 33 degrees to activate the bitumen. Can you explain what that means in English?
Yes, with the surface we've got out there, the bitumen and stone, some of the rectification measures that were recommended by the local contractors that were involved in the construction involves either laying more stone and rolling it in, or rolling over the surface that's there to embed the stone more. So in order for that to happen, you need the bitumen to get hot or warm and pliable and sticky. And so when you put more stone in, it'll roll in and embed into it and stick into it. If you do it while the weather's too cold, it won't stick. It's like old chewing gum, sort of trying to stick something to old chewing gum. It just doesn't work. So the activation level for the bitumen is 50 degrees C, which on a nice sunny day, we've been advised equates to about 33 degrees, 32, 33 degrees Celsius ambient temperature. But we do have a heat gun that we can see, like, take the temperature of the bitumen. The reason I put that in there, just to, like, some people are asking, why haven't we done anything? Why haven't we done anything? It hasn't been hot enough.
And now we're heading into winter. So is this something that we may have to wait for the warmer weather to rectify?
That may be the case, yes. And let's see what this new and higher qualified expert has to say about the matter. And wait to see his report.
Through you, Mr. Chair, didn't we know this already? I mean, wouldn't this have been known before we put the bitumen down instead of the hot mix?
I'm unclear what you mean, Councillor. Wasn't what known already?
With the remediation measures requiring more than 30 degrees to activate the bitumen. Again, why did we use bitumen when we had initially approved hot mix?
That will have to go back to decisions that were made a year and a half ago. I can't answer that.
The director provided that response to Councillor Abbott last week, didn't you, in an email?
It was very vague. I may ask more
So there was a
questions.
council decision. In short, the council considered the contract for the airside works. It was in the order of $12 to $13 million or thereabouts. It came back to council for rescoping. They removed about $3 million from the works so that could meet their budget. And the majority of that was the AC surface treatment, which was that 2 million, was it? Yeah. So that was, I think that was an email to you last week, Councillor.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I take Councillor Abbott's point though, in terms of if we know that, this is basic process, so that's got to be 33 degrees for it to set and all of that kind of thing. Was that not done? Did we do that during winter or something was it not laid properly in terms of the temperature and the timing? Was that something that contributed?
Chris, I'll just maybe jump in for councillor's benefit. When you lay it, it's preferable that it's laid in the hottest weather, but you can lay it in cold weather. The bitumen is actually applied at about 180 degrees Celsius, so it comes out of the tank sprayer at a very hot temperature. It holds that temperature for some time. The hotter the day, obviously, the longer it holds that temperature and gives you more working time. So this is not a question about when the work was done so much. It's the fact that when it was done, something went wrong, whether it wasn't enough bitumen, it was too much stone, wasn't rolled long enough. We don't know all the answers to that, and that's what the investigation will tell us. What we do know, though, is that now that the bitumen is cooled, you can't get it back up to a working temperature to fix it until you get above that 33 degrees. So you can either let nature take its course and wait for a hot sunny day, or we can use a heat gun and we can reactivate the bitumen by heating it up. But obviously that's more costly and you can only do small patches at a time. So it's not so much about the temperature on the day that it was laid, it's now that getting it back up to that temperature to fix the problem is the issue.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, with respect to the savings that we were supposed to make by putting bitumen down instead of hot mix, what savings have we made? It seems to me that it's costing us money.
Well, at this stage, you've saved about $2 million in the construction cost. Until we know the rectification cost, we won't know what it's cost. The rectification may not be on the entire site. It may be just limited to certain parts. So we won't know at this stage.
And through you, Mr. Chair, do we know what the current costs are for example, the sweeper that's sweeping up the stones and the water cart? Do we know what operational costs we're looking at for that we may not have had otherwise?
The sweeping would be happening, although probably not as frequent. So it may be a little bit difficult. We could make some estimates about the additional sweeping. I don't have those figures at my fingertips, but we could make some estimates. And the water cart has really only been on site for some very critical days when we knew the temperature was going to be hot and we may have had issues. But we might be able to pull that out of the system.
We should be able to pull that out of the system.
We'll see what we can find.
I think the sweeping cost every time it sweeps over is about $500.
Okay, moving on. Still on the bottom of page 35. The Hunter Wallbirds construction, as I said, will be completed mid-March, and the planes and the other exhibition items have been installed in the hangar, and the audio-visual displays have been set up. Now, of course, the planes move in and out. It's an active museum. Last 2 weeks ago, all the planes were there. We went there last week, and 3 of them were out doing flights and being certified. So they had to do their annual certifications. So on any given day when you walk in, there may be full of planes, or there might be 1 or 2 missing.
Through you, Mr. Chair, how many planes do we have in there at the moment?
There's 14.
14, thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, how long will those planes be part of the exhibit? Because they're not our planes. I mean, or they're not necessarily Mr. Pay's planes.
Through the chair, if I may. So the plan is that we have various agreements in place. We're looking at refreshing on a 12 monthly basis. So yes, it's not a static display. And again, where we need to get to as an organisation is it's not a museum, it's a visitor attraction, because a museum is where planes go to die. So what we're invariably doing here is allowing the broader tourism population to come and view what will be very much a pattern of between 14, possibly up to 17 planes at any given time. And then we will look to rotate that display to keep it fresh and make sure that not only people that haven't been to visit, but those that have previously been, that we've got something new and exciting to share with them.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So these planes are here to be repaired or maintained. So what is the turnover? Because they belong to people around the world. So how long will they be staying for? How do we guarantee that there are always planes in this visitors attraction centre?
Yeah, the agreement stipulates 15 planes, which is, I think there's 14 there at the moment. So like David said, it's not a static display, it's a revolving display. There might be some, we might source some planes from overseas, they might come in and we might exhibit that for a while and put a plane that's been there for quite some time out somewhere else. It just keeps the exhibition fresh for people wanting to come back and see something new.
So just to clarify through you, Mr. Chair, so we're doing the seeking overseas of planes, or is that Mr. Pay doing that?
Mr. Pay's doing that, or Pay's Aviation is doing that.
And through you, Mr. Chair, what protections does council and the community have should Mr. Pay no longer be in the business of aircraft maintenance in the near future?
Councillors, we have entered into a legal agreement with Pays, and we've provided that to council. We'll provide that again, but it gives us protections, and we'll circulate that again. But it was circulated only 6 to 8 months ago to council, so we'll do it again.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. And through you, Mr. Chair, yes, and I have asked for a legal briefing on that, but I'm happy to put my questions back to you, perhaps to guide further information, because I still remain concerned. Thank you.
Okay, moving on, we're on page 36. There's a note there that we've already discussed about the rectification works on the surfaces and the effect that may or may not have on budget. There's uncertainty there, so we've already discussed that. As I said, the attraction is 99%, well, it'll be 100% complete today. Contingency, now I've listed it there, it's 50,000. Now last month it was down to 20,000, but there was an area, a budget item, a line item that had a budget that we realised that we didn't need all of that budget on that line item. We'd already completed the work and there was money left over in that line item, so that got shifted down to contingency. So that's why the contingency has jumped from 20 up to 50 in the last month. So we're managing that budget very tightly. Variations are all under control, as the notes say there. All the designs obviously completed now. There is the risk of, well, they're vanishing now because the project's nearly finished. Contractors have been performing very well, and work health and safety, there's been no incidents. So looking at the top of page 37, I'll just summarise these. There's a lot of dot points there, but major things that have happened in the month that the report refers to is the construction of the pump house at the southern end of the facility. Then the next half a dozen line item dot points, are they were all about the completion of the terminal building, the fit out of it, its decoration, carpets, toilets, etc. Then the next few is about the hangar, that it's complete, the floor was complete, the planes and the epoxy covering has been done. The planes have been rolled in, the exhibition items have been installed, the lighting's finished. The land outside, then the landscaping, it's completed just this week, and the fencing around the perimeter, it's still ongoing, and that will take another few weeks to finish the fencing around the perimeter.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Just the signage, will that be ready for the Warbirds display? I'm just concerned particularly for the evacuation points and that major signage going in. Will that be all squared away before we have a huge event there?
The evacuation signage, that's part of the building compliance. The inspector's actually there right now doing an inspection for building compliance to sign off. So all that's in place. The signage on the block walls at the gate has been completed today. Yeah, so it should all be in place. It's the big Hunter Warbirds is on the side, and the Scone Memorial Airport's on the front of the hangar, on the front of the terminal building. Sorry.
And so you were talking about, and apparently Dave Gatwood was involved, so I'm glad to see you back, Dave, signage for like business listings so that we don't get a proliferation of business signs out there of all different shapes and colours everywhere. So will that be done by the time the Warbirds display happens?
It is a work in progress. It's unlikely to be completed by that time frame, but we want to take a coordinated approach. And again, again, I guess to your point, we don't want it to look like a dog's breakfast, and to make it very clear for people who are coming in, both from a visitor point of view and from a potential commercial opportunity. So, I guess to answer your question, we're unlikely to have it finished by the following weekend.
And there is some general lawn mowing and snipping, whippersnipping that has to happen next week, waiting until all the construction activities are finished and the equipment's moved and the construction sheds will be moved next week. So in this next week, there'll be a lot of tidying up and prettying up. Next period, well, everything that's listed there as next period is just be complete today, apart from the fence. The fencing will continue. Critical issues for attention, most of those have already been addressed now, but it's the runway and the taxiway and the open way surfaces, we've talked about those.
Sorry, just through you, Mr. Chair, when it says completion of pump house construction, the pump house will be good to go the day of the Warbirds? Like, we're not going to have any issues with that?
It's commissioned now.
It's commissioned now. Okay,
yeah.
good.
Look, there was some cladding that was missing that only arrived yesterday afternoon. They had to bring it up from Newcastle. And the major risks now, well, they're vanishing now too. I must say that the last risk there, delays associated with COVID-19. In January, we did have some significant disruptions due to COVID. Tradesmen that were due to turn up that couldn't because them or their family had tested positive. So there was some small delays. The contractor worked around it, but in February it was just some minor occurrences. So now, if we turn the page. We can see on page 38 the anticipated completion date, 18th of March, so that's today. And then if we turn the page again until page 42, there's the expenditure there for the second table on page 42, the year-to-date actual expenditure excluding GST was 5.8 million. And by the end of April, it'll be up around that 6.9 million. Any further questions?
Yes. On page 10, where it mentioned that the airport development was lower than the budget by 107,000, what does that mean? Is that where some of the contingency came from? And the contingency is still very low, and that really worries me.
Just to answer the councillor's question, that's effectively a running total as at the end of February.
Right.
And obviously there'll be invoices coming in and out, obviously during March. So that was just the balance as at that date.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. And on page 43, in relation to the sentence that talks about adopt value engineering approach, what is value engineering? It sounds like a shortcut.
In fact, it's just the opposite, through the chair. Value engineering, it's really value for money is a common term. Sometimes there was some options, like people have a shopping list. You get towards the end of the project, I want this, I want that, I want that. And some things are necessary you need due to compliance or safety or whatever. But others are like, they might want something that makes no big difference to the project. And it was well, how much value is that going to add? Do we have, is it in the budget? Is it, first of all, you look, is it in the budget? Is there money allocated to it? If not, it's got to come out of contingency. If it's coming out of contingency, then is it really going to add value to the project or not? You know, is it value for money? And so that whole process, we sort of term value engineering. It's like looking at the budget and the allocation. And then some things we say, no, you might want it, but it's not going to add value to the project. So no.
Thank you. And the surfaces on the runway, taxiway and apron, how will they be affected by the Warbirds display next weekend? Or how will they actually affect the Warbirds display?
I don't believe that will affect the Warbirds display.
So we're not worried about the runway and planes landing on it? Everything's fine?
Yeah, the runway's been working. You know, it's still in operation. We're not considering any issues with it.
So through you, Mr. Chair, do we know what the temperature is going to be next weekend?
Yeah, so if we had an extremely hot weekend for the last weekend of March, which is probably out of character, but if we did, we'd have to look at the provisions that we've already put in place, such as having maybe rollers on site, water carts and the like. The other option is we've looked at large matting on the apron area for where some of the vendors will be, some of the point loading from any motor vehicles that are parked there and the like. We're watching the temperature and the forecast at the moment and having those things up the back up our sleeve. I guess the prediction that I've seen recently is that we're not going to get those temperatures. We may get some nice days. We're hoping for great weather, of course, but it's unlikely that we'll see the type of temperatures that will cause the dramas that we saw back in January and February.
I'll just add to that. I think you have to consider the Warbirds over Scone event. It's just for the actual airport itself. It's business as usual. They're not changing anything. They're not going to land in a special way. They're still going to hit the ground, and that's the way that it works.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's more, and I have heard concerns from airport users, if there are issues with the apron and the taxiway, that they do have to have contingencies such as the matting because of just the increased amount of movement. So yes, landing and everything's fine, but when you've got that amount of movement, they're just concerned about the rating risk, which is high, and just making sure they have contingencies for that, because a lot of people are saying they're concerned just about the volume whilst we're still looking at remediation steps for the asphalt.
I do understand what you're saying, but it's no different to if we had a fly-in for the day. If those individuals that are concerned had organised a fly-in for the day, would we be any more concerned? I think there are people out there making comments about things that they actually don't know anything about. And we've got experts like GHD looking at this. We're not doing this on a napkin.
But in fairness, the rating here for the risk summary for the surfaces and taxiway potential operations is high.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's overstated, but I think we need contingencies, and I think it's sensible to have contingencies and not think that it's just normal day operation. There's a lot more vehicle movements there. It won't be just normal operation.
Now we're aware of the additional movements, and we've got something up our sleeve. Predominantly there'll be the water cart and the matting will be the controls. The other thing probably should point out, and Chris arranged for the entire, was it 5 metres from the 11 metres, was it? More than I thought. 11 metres from the Warbirds hangar out into the apron had to be reconstructed as part of the construction works, because obviously there was damage to that, and that was allowed for in the original construction tender. But rather than doing it in a spray seal, we took the opportunity there to at least do that 11 metres in asphalt. So that has been done in asphalt. So we know that we won't have the same problems on that portion. And that's fairly critical, because that's the section where the planes actually wheel into the hangar. So it gives them opportunity to stop, brush off the wheels, clean the wheels before going into the hangar and the like. So that's been a great initiative, and that was one of the great ideas Chris had as we were finalising the works.
Okay, the report. So back to the recommendation that council receive the report and note the information. Can I have a mover and a seconder?
I'll move it.
Moved by
I'll
councillor
second
Abbott,
it.
seconded councillor Flaherty. All those in favour?
Aye.
Excellent. The ayes have it. I will congratulate staff. I think they've done a fantastic job. Corporate services, point 03.4, responses to previous questions. Councillors, are you happy with your responses? I am.
To a point, I am, but I am looking forward to more information on my question regarding goals and the lack of that were in the climate change strategy. So I am looking forward to, yes, more on that one. That's on page 46. And it's the third question on that page. And it was, yes, it followed on after the Sustainability Action Plan. So it's the one where I ask about council's goals. But I'm guessing we'll talk about that further. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I find the answer to my one of my first questions that I'd forgotten I'd even asked about number of customer complaints. I was asking, why there were, an above average number of complaints, if there was anything going on. And the response is that 17 is greater than the number of 6, which I find a little bit facetious. Could I have maybe some more detail on that? I'd forgotten I'd even asked it, but I think that's a fairly nonsensical answer.
Sorry, councillor. So you weren't asking. You're asking why we had exceeded the number of complaints was your question?
Yes, yes. I wasn't asking.
Rather than why does it show red? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
No,
I knew it was red.
The question's been answered literally. I can see.
Yeah.
And your question was more about. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Yes. Not why is it red because it's greater than 6.
I can probably give you a quick update. With all the wet weather we had in November and in again in February, a lot of our sewage system became inundated with water. So water does get into the system. It's not a sealed system. That manifests itself in surcharges at property boundaries where the house connection connects to the sewer, or through manholes. So we get a lot of complaints in wet weather from overflow sewers. It's not uncommon, it happens everywhere, but the number of complaints do spike when we get wet weather. So that's probably the short answer.
And when we have those weather events and we see it spiking in certain areas, do we then go back and investigate if it needs remediation work or if it needs to be upscaled? Or
so water enters the system generally 2 ways. One is just through groundwater if the pipes are cracked, and as Mr. Phelps said earlier, we do closed circuit TV inspections to look for cracks in our pipework and displaced joints. That can also be shown through root ingress. So when roots get into the system, they open up the pipes and water gets in that way. The second way water gets in is through house connections. Now, a lot of people have illegal connections to the sewer because they either have water problems on their property or their house drainage system, their stormwater has been illegally connected to the sewer to dispose of the water. So if we get a lot of complaints in a particular area, it's generally an indication that we've got either poor pipes or poor connections. And that's where we can do 2 testing. We can do smoke testing to find out if people have got illegal connections, where we pump smoke into the system and you'll see it coming out through the stormwater system. And we know there was a cross connection between the 2, or we do the CCTV inspection. With the type of events we had in November and February, in effect, we had issues all over. There was so much water getting in that it would make it hard to actually pinpoint a particular issue. But smaller events, you can start to pinpoint the issues.
Okay, well, we'll note that report. Have a mover and a seconder, please.
I'll move it.
Moved by Councillor Flaherty,
Seconded.
seconded Councillor Abbott. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Councillor, questions?
Yes, I have a few. First, I've been told that the cemetery is looking very unkempt at the moment, so I just thought I'd mention that. It's probably not one for here, but I just wanted to mention it.
I will give a response. So we had a complaint, I think, on Tuesday about the lawn cemetery. The rain event for this period only really finished last weekend. We had 170 mils in March alone. The staff did try to get onto it earlier in the week because we did have a burial or funeral service up there. They were just making such a mess that they just backed out. They did a bit of whippersnipping to try and manage it, but just with the amount of rain, it's been difficult. They were back there yesterday, I understand, and they had a much better crack at it yesterday with a couple of days dry weather.
Thank you. And so also with respect to native title, not native title, the fact that council has engaged a firm called RPS to do consulting work to negotiate with First Nations people about our Crown lands. I'm just wondering why we have asked RPS. I've had a question put to me from First Nations person wondering why we would engage them, given this person thinks it's just bleeding up a Hunter Shire Council of money. And so why and also what is it costing at the moment?
I'll have to take that one on notice. I'll get Director Pringle to provide an answer. We do have a procurement process, so we would have gone through whatever procurement process we have for engaging that consultant, but I'd need to get more information as to why he chose them over anyone else.
Thank you. And with respect, this is possibly not for here, but with car expenses, the councillors claim, can you, if you don't use your car that much, can you claim bicycle expenses?
It's not currently in our claims policy. At the moment, the expense for motor vehicles is pretty much limited to a dollar value per kilometre used. So there's no mechanism and there's nothing in the policy. If councillors want to explore that, we could. I can't imagine it's going to be too expensive for council to pay bicycle expenses. But
no, I just want to put that. I don't claim for cars, but I do ride my bike and occasionally there are expenses. But anyway,
I'd support a motion to support bikes as well.
If it encourages bicycle use, it might be something we look at.
Yes, cut our car costs considerably if we get them all riding bikes. So yeah, sure.
And with respect to council superannuation that has been mooted by local government New South Wales, do we have a plan on what we might do there?
We're actually investigating that at the moment and we'll go through the process. And
lovely, thank you. Thank you. And have we divested from fossil fuels yet in our own share portfolio? And do we have any exposure to Russia at the moment?
We don't have a share portfolio.
I mean, well, investments or how we do invest money. So are we investing in fossil fuels?
I think it'd be difficult to know because a lot of the products that we invest in are organised by banks and they have a mixture of shares that they build those portfolios up with, and we wouldn't know. I would suspect that they would have some investment in either petroleum, oil, and the like. So there would be fossil fuel linkages to some of those products that we would invest in. And we don't have a policy at this stage that prohibits that. We need to follow the local Office of Local Government investment process, which limits us to certain products of a certain investment categories. But we don't have a policy in this council that limits us to the types of investments.
Thank you. And also, with respect to the rising cost of petrol, will this sort of galvanise us? Could this galvanise us to be implementing an electric vehicle program quicker than we have done?
Yeah, certainly it's not something we've turned our mind to in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we've seen a spike of 30 and 40 cents per litre in probably the last fortnight alone. It's certainly going to have an impact on our budget, and that'll be something that we'll need to consider. Electric vehicles, though, as you know, are still expensive from a capital purchase perspective, but they are gaining popularity. And only last week we had another approach for another EV station here in Scone. So we're seeing people take up the infrastructure side of it now, which is certainly encouraging.
Lovely. And my last one, with the new laptops, what was the cost of that? And I'm still concerned about, I am still struggling with mine, and I realise that's a user problem, but I would just like to know why we went for new laptops and how much that has cost us.
The cost of the laptops was just over $16,000 for all councillors.
And
Did the whole of council get new laptops?
No, only the councillor. That's the councillor's cost of their new.
So the staff didn't get them as well? Or?
Staff haven't got those at the moment, no.
through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, I find the iPad a nightmare. I'd actually prefer to go, I'm talking about going back to my laptop. I just find the usability of it really restricted. But my question is, the council staff costs for the clinic at Merriwa blows my mind, because I mean, we weren't hiring nurses to administer vaccines. We weren't doing any of that. I'm just wondering why that staff cost for a day is so high.
We had staff there all day. And
what were they doing?
They're actually supervising crowds and everything out of the facility.
But we had
to set up,
SES, we had a range of people there. Like, how many staff did we have on site that
the
day?
general manager was out there.
So I was there. I think you dropped in for one of the days, Liz. So my costs weren't charged to it, although I was there for the entire day. Predominantly, we had probably 4 or 5 staff on duty throughout the day, and that was mainly coordinating people entering the site. We had 700 people turn up on that first day. So yes, we had the SES assisting. We also had police out there, and we also had the VRA on site as volunteers. So the cost would be much higher if we had to pay them. We also had a lot of our staff arrive several hours before the event. They did a lot of the traffic control. They set up the barrier boards. They set up the signage for the building. Afterwards, there was cleaning costs. Staff had to, well, I don't know how much of it, like we didn't do a full deep clean, but there was a bigger clean than you would normally do because of the nature of the COVID clinic. Packing up the building, there was some minor catering costs in predominantly water. Most of the other food costs were met by the individual people there, but we did buy quite a bit of water for the volunteers and the like. So I haven't got the full breakdown of that figure there in front of me. I know it seems a lot, but it did cost us more. As you know, the intent was that we're just simply going to provide the facility, and the state government and the flying doctors were going to do the rest. But the organisation of that fell predominantly to council at the end of the day because they just didn't have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, I just question, like, as you know, I was out there and there were lots of comments saying, why in the hell are there so many police? I've never seen so many police, even at a murder scene. And I've been to a few of those. Like the amount of volunteers and police and all that kind of stuff just seemed really overblown. And yes, there were a lot of people, but I think, you know, the basics were implemented, and the SES coming through, giving people water was fantastic. I just think that perhaps in terms of staffing, it was overblown. And I know you're out there all day, but I'm sure I would have rather you be doing much more important things with budgets and stuff like that. I'm not sure if it was worth your time to be there either, when, you know, senior staff could have been there.
Yeah, I guess my job gets done regardless of whether I'm there or here. I just do longer hours. So I felt it was important that I be out there. It was a big event for this organisation. We got thrown it with 24 hours, 48 hours notice. It needed a lot of coordination, and it needed someone there in a senior capacity at least to be able to make decisions on the run. I guess the costs associated with the police weren't borne by council, so that wasn't an issue. Our biggest concern for the day was we didn't know how many people were going to turn up, and obviously by 9 a.m. we had 700 people queued up, and some of those people queued for 4 and 5 hours. So we had a concern with, we had a large number of people and potentially very angry because they'd been standing for so long. So
I didn't see anyone angry.
no, they weren't.
Lovely.
But no, they weren't. And that's I guess one of the great things about the day and how successful it was. But going into the day, knowing that we could have potentially people there very, very frustrated, very angry, starting to sort of lose their cool. It was a very hot day as well, you may recall. So people's, we're just very conscious that things could have gone wrong very quickly. So we made sure that we had the processes in place to be able to manage that if it happened. As it turned out, it didn't, and it all went very smoothly.
I'd like to say in defence of the Flying Doctor Service, they too were thrown that very last minute. So it's a little bit disappointing just to see that they were not as efficient at running the service as anticipated, because they also got very short notice, and to the point where they were looking for doctors here as well. So it was one of those things that just came up, and it was a massive rush.
Now, look, I think, as you say, all parties were given very short notice. We pulled it together, but the expectation was that there'd be no demand on council other than the hall, and that unfortunately wasn't the case.
I've got to say too, I don't like the slight about saying, the Flying Doctors Service. I mean, those medical organisations are usually extraordinary at logistics and things. So I think it's a bit churlish having that there.
I think it serves as a great reminder that every time we make a decision here, there is a cost, whether it's a cost we bear or one that's already there because of staffing. Staff do cost us a lot. To get good staff, we have to pay, and that's what we do. So I do know that it takes a lot out of our budget, but yeah, I don't think that we can. That's not something that we can skimp on at all. So yeah, I'd thank you. With no more questions, I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you.